and things would have continued in this perfect state forever. But Satan deceived them. Now, I wanted to read something in Romans chapter 3 and verse 20. Here's what it says. Therefore, by the deeds of the law there shall no flesh be justified in his sight, for by the law is the knowledge of sin. In fact, go to Romans chapter 7 and let me read verse 7. Romans 7 and verse 7 says, what shall we say then? Is the law sin? God forbid. I had not known sin but by the law. For I had not known lust except the law had said, thou shalt not covet. Now all my life, I was raised to understand that what these verses mean is that through the law you obtain a definition of sin. And I know you have heard this, and you have heard it again, and you have heard it again. That what these verses mean is that the law gives you the definition of sin. But I wanted to look at these verses. And I could read a dozen more to go with them. And ask yourself, is this what Paul is really saying? Because what I've found critical about the Bible is that many times we read it so that it says what we think it should say. We don't read it to hear what it is saying. The Apostle Peter said that the Apostle Paul has written some things that are hard to be understood. And those who are unlearned and ignorant, they twist these things. They turn them around to their own destruction. But I found it interesting as I was looking at this. You know who were the people that found Paul's writings hard to be understood? The Jews. The Gentiles didn't have that problem. The ignorant people who knew nothing about the law, who had no preconceived ideas, when Paul preached, they were converted in droves. He had the greatest success among the Gentiles. The ones that Peter was speaking to when he said, some find Paul hard to understand, they were the good old Jews. Because they were so steeped in the traditions of Judaism that they could not hear anything new, anything fresh. No new perspective, because they knew it all already. They condemned Paul when they are the ones who needed to have their thinking adjusted. And brothers and sisters, it happened in 1888. Every place that you find Christ being lifted up, it seems that the law is being put down. And it is not that the law is being put down, but it is that when the law is placed where Christ should be, for him to take his rightful place, you have to nudge it from that pedestal. Christ must stand in the central position. The law must take its rightful place. And so people say, no, this is not right. You're attacking the law, but you're not doing that at all. You're putting Christ where he belongs. Now, maybe that's a little off target here, but what I'm saying is, look at what Paul is saying and let us see if this is his true meaning. Paul says, I would not have known sin but by the law. Now you can think of this in two ways. There are two understandings of this word know, as I pointed out. One of them is a theoretical knowledge, a definition of sin. The other one is a personal relationship where I recognize something integrated into my experience. You see what I'm saying? There are these two definitions of the word know. And, and I'm telling you, the second one is used in the Bible more often than we think. Many times we talk about, the Bible talks about knowing something, and you think getting a definition. That's not what it means at all. Now Paul says, I would not have known sin but by the law. And if you continue to read in that very passage in Romans 7, you find that what he's saying is that I came to know that there was something in my experience. In fact, he says, in my body. It is no more I that do it, but what? Sin that dwelleth in me. How does he know that sin dwells in him? How does he know that there is a power in him that he cannot fight and he cannot resist, that is greater than him? How does he know this? He said, I was alive without the law once. But when the commandment came, sin revived. What does it mean to revive? It comes to life. When the commandment came, sin revived and I died. He says, I like the law of God with my mind, but then I find another law. What made him find this law? I find a law in my members, warring against the law of my mind and bringing me into captivity, making me a slave to the law of sin which is in my members. It is the law of God that makes him aware that there is another thing at work inside of him. He would not have known sin but by the law, because he says, without the commandment I was what? Sin was dead. What I'm saying is that the purpose of the law, primarily, in Paul's teaching, the purpose of the law is to make us know sin. Now, when I realized this, I recognized that it's the same thing that happened to Adam. God gave him a law so he could have the opportunity of knowing sin. Adam might have said, without the tree, I would not have known sin. Paul says, I would not have known sin but by the law. Adam could have said, I would not have known sin but by the tree. It was the same purpose. God gave him a law at the tree. And God says, if you break this law, you will know evil. He uses evil. Later on, Paul says sin. Paul says, I was going along fine. I didn't know sin. But then I came upon the law, and the law made me aware that there was something named sin. What he's saying is that the law's purpose is to define, to identify something inside of me. It gives me a different understanding of what this word law implies and what it means and what is its purpose. You know, if you think that the only definition of sin, if you think the only way you can sin is if you break a certain definition, if you go against a certain definition, you have problems with the Bible. When God said to Moses, speak to the rock, he made up a law. He could have said to Moses, look at the rock. Couldn't he? He said, speak to the rock. He made up a rule. Moses struck the rock instead of speaking to the rock. And God said, because of this, you will never see the promised land. He made up a rule. Another time, God made up another law. You know what he said? Strange. He said, take now your son, your only son that you love, and take him to the mountain that I'm going to show you and offer him for a sacrifice. You know the funny thing about this rule that God made up? This rule required Abraham to break the 10 Commandments. Do you realize that? If the only understanding is the definition, then when God says to you, take your son and murder him in cold blood on that mountain, what are you supposed to say? I'm sorry, I can't break the commandments. I'm sorry, your law says thou shalt not kill, so I will not offer my son. God put Abraham in a real dilemma. I don't know what you would do if he put you there. If he put you there, because it was between the devil and the deep blue sea. He was damned if he did and damned if he didn't. Because if he killed his son, he was a murderer. He broke the law, didn't he? And if he did not kill his son, he transgressed the first commandment. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. So God put him in a position where it had to be greater than the definition. Now it came to the question of who is number one in your life. It's interesting. In a sense, he put Abraham where Adam was, because Adam looked at Eve and he saw the treasure of his life, and he recognized, if I go with her, I will die. But I'm going to lose God. And he said, I prefer to lose God. Abraham looked upon the treasure of his life and he recognized, if I obey, I'm going to lose the treasure of my life, but I will keep God. And he chose God. You see why Abraham is called the father of faith? Eve failed, but Adam failed, but Abraham didn't. He chose God above the greatest treasure of his life. And ultimately, that is what Christianity means. And when we boil it down to a definition of 10 rules, we're missing the point. I'm not against the Ten Commandments. Please don't think I am.